All right, this is, as I said, based on the outline that we have there, is the turning point in the story. It's an event that takes place in the evening at night, an encounter between Ruth and Boaz that leads to the daytime vindication of Ruth and the redemption of Ruth. A couple things. Brian asked about the term for avenger of blood, and it is Goel. In Numbers 35, it's Goel Hadam. Hadam is the blood. He's the redeemer of the blood, would be another way to translate it. Okay, a couple things to note here, and then I'll open it up for discussion. First off, this is, as Ruth did in the last chapter, Ruth is following Naomi's instructions. Ruth is, in a sense, acting as a redeemer for Naomi. And the Boaz is the one who's going to ultimately restore Naomi's fortunes through Ruth. But Ruth is providing food for Naomi. She's going to be the means for the continuation of Naomi's family, for the restoration of her house and the restoration of her property and so on. So it's under Naomi's instructions that Ruth goes through this. Verse 3 is intriguing. Wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your best clothes, and go down to the threshing floor. Okay. In the context of this incident, she's going to approach a man at night, and Naomi is advising her to dress. Anoint would be probably an aromatic anointing of some sort, a kind of perfume. So there's a reason in the immediate context for her doing that. But those are also preparatory actions for approaching the Lord. When an Israelite comes to the tabernacle, he has to be in a state of cleanliness, wash himself. A priest, in order to approach the Lord, is washed, anointed, and clothed with the priestly garments, and then he's installed as priest. And that hint of that priestly dimension is strengthened by the place where she's going. She's going to the threshing floor. This is just a threshing floor where the grain has been beaten out at the end of the harvest. But the temple, we find out later on in Chronicles, the temple is actually built on a threshing floor. We'll talk about more about that tomorrow. But the temple is built on the threshing floor of Arana. And so every time Israel prepared themselves to enter the Lord's presence, they would be going to a threshing floor. They would be like the wheats being beaten out so that the chaff and the wheat would be separated, so they could make a good, healthy loaf of bread, so the Lord could make Israel into bread for the Gentiles. That's part of what's happening in the temple system. The priests would be washed, anointed, and vested so that they could serve at the threshing floor. So there's this kind of liturgical overtone to what Ruth is doing in addition to that practical approach to Boaz. I should add, thinking to our Jamie Souls song at the end of the last session, it's probably not wise for you to seek a husband or for you to advise your daughters to seek a husband in this fashion. Find a guy who's had a lot to eat and drink, who's asleep out in the open, and crawl next to him at night. Okay. One other thing I wanted to connect to that is going back to our discussion of wings. I'm glad, Samuel, your translation had verse 9, spread your wings over your maid. That's the literal Hebrew. Mine says spread your covering, which loses the connection. The previous chapter, Ruth has come under the wings of Yahweh, under his protection. And she's gone on a kind of exodus out of Moab into the land. But now that wing has become personified or specified as the wing of Boaz. And he's going to be the one that's bringing her under his wing. Bringing a woman under your wing is an image of marriage. The wing of the garment is the edge of the garment. That's the normal phrase in the Hebrew. It's often translated as edge of the garment, but it's actually the word wing. Maybe this is supposed to indicate that Israel is a heavenly people, and so they're equipped with robes that have wings on them, so they can fly. Not literally. Numbers requires the Israelites to have tassels on the wings of their garments. At the edges of their garments, they're supposed to have tassels that are a mixture of linen and wool. Okay. Anybody think that's strange? Mixture of linen and wool. Why strange?
Because
Yeah.
Because they're told not to mix linen and wool.
Yeah. They're not supposed to wear mixed garments. But there's a little mixed tassel of linen and wool at the wing of the garment. We can think of, so the wing is, we talked about the wing as an image associated with Exodus, the wings of the cherubim associated with the tabernacle. But the Lord's wing is also the Lord spreading his garment and the wing of his garment over his bride. That's imagery used by Ezekiel. And Boaz is the Lord's servant spreading his wing over Ruth. So the effect of that, of course, is that if you spread the wing of your garment over a woman, you're wearing the same garment. It's a kind of one flesh image. You're bringing her under your protection. You're committing to protect her, but you're also joining together in one flesh. That's part of the imagery that's being used here. Okay, and that would fit, I think, with the kind of echoes of a liturgical approach. He's coming near to Boaz so he can spread his wing over her, and Israel, in its normal liturgical life, would approach the threshing floor of the temple to come under the Lord's wings. Yeah.
Why are there robes then mixed into?
Yeah, I never finished that, did I? Yeah. Anybody have a thought? Anybody know of other occasions when mixed garments are not only permitted but required? What's that? Yeah. Yeah. The priestly garments are a mixture of wool and linen, and the mixture is not unclean. The mixture is holy, and it's reserved for priests. And so only the priests wear mixed garments in Israel. But each Israelite is a member of the priestly people. So although they wear only linen or only wool, they have this little sign of their sanctity as a priestly people at the wing of the garment. It's a sign of their priestly status as an entire nation. Yeah. Okay, I want to follow up on its comments about no sexuality here, but get to it kind of indirectly. We talked about Lot and his daughters. Anybody see any similarities between what Brian described in Genesis and what's going on here? Okay. Yeah, Boaz has eaten and drunk. His heart is merry. I don't think that means he's uncontrollably drunk. That's what wine is for. It's to make your heart merry. That's a good thing. That's part of the gift of wine. So he's not drunk, but he has had wine. So earlier in the story of Lot, when the men of Sodom are trying to break down the door, he offers his daughters, and Boaz is doing the opposite. He's throwing protection over Ruth. So you've got a woman approaching a man. It's a nighttime scene. He's had something to drink. She's a Moabitess. Okay. She is a daughter descended from one of Lot's daughters. So at one level, this just looks like everyday Moabite behavior. This is what Moabites do. They find drunk men and they sleep with them. But I think it is right that they don't have sexual relations here. What would you say is an indication of that in the passage? You pointed to Boaz's character as in general, which I think is a good argument. What else might indicate that? Okay, so yeah, when he discovers her, all we learn about them is they have this conversation, and she asks for him to commit to spreading his wing over her. Right? What is Boaz's response? She asked him to be my redeemer, my Goel. And what is Boaz's response?
There's one person before.
Okay. So again, thinking of Boaz's character, and Boaz knows that Ruth might become the wife of another man who has a first right of refusal, as it were. Boaz is not a man to take his pleasure with Ruth one night and then say, now she gets off to another guy, right? I mean, that could very well undermine her hopes for redemption, because the other redeemer might refuse her specifically because he had slept with her. So I think that the fact that there's another redeemer is another, and given what we already know about Boaz, those are strong reasons for thinking that there's nothing, that there's no sexual intercourse here. Let's see. I don't know that there's anything else I want to say about that. This is, again, the turning point in the story. It's a nighttime encounter. Everything's turning around at this nighttime encounter. I guess I should just close off the idea of the Moabites. I think what the similarities between this story and the story of Lot and his daughters are they're striking similarities. But I think the point of those similarities is to highlight the difference between Ruth and her ancestors. Lot's daughters deliberately made him drunk in order to have sexual relations with him. Ruth didn't make Boaz drunk. He's not drunk. He knows what he's doing. And she's seeking, she's not just seeking to continue the line of Boaz, but she's seeking to come under the Lord's protection and under Boaz's protection. So I think instead of being another example of Moabite misbehavior, Ruth is actually redeeming Moab, and it's a reversal ultimately of the two daughters of Lot. She's doing the opposite of them, although in the surface level they look similar, but more deeply she's actually reversing their illicit, incestuous approach to their father. Okay. Tsega, can you read the last part of chapter 3, please? Okay. Let me make a couple of observations about the structure of these central chapters 2 and 3. Both of them have the same kind of narrative structure, with Naomi sending Ruth out to do something. She goes out and encounters Boaz, and then she returns to Naomi with food. That's chapter 2. The first encounter is at the field. They eat lunch, they share bread and wine, and then she returns with the results of her gleaning. At night, Naomi again sends Ruth out. Ruth again goes to Boaz, and then she comes back with grain, barley, for Naomi, and reports back to Naomi. You have the same kind of narrative structure, which again is keeping Naomi in our minds. She's the frame around both these episodes. If we just had the episodes without Naomi giving instructions, we might be thinking, oh, this is Ruth's story, or Ruth's story alone. But the fact that Naomi is the one that's giving instructions keeps us mindful of the fact that she's the one that's She's kind of, in a sense, the central character of the whole story. The other thing is that I think that part of what's going on here with the measures of, I'm sorry, I did want to mention a couple of things that I had missed earlier. Verses 12 and 13 those two verses use the word goel six times in two verses. Sometimes as a noun, translated as close relative or redeemer. Sometimes as the verb redeem, that's just the verb form of goel. And in the scene as a whole, there's a seventh use in verse 9 when Ruth asks Boaz to spread his covering or wing over her, for you are a goel. So total in the scene, there are 7 uses of that word. And that's a common literary device in biblical narrative, a repetition of a root word a significant number of times to highlight a particular theme. And what's going on with goel here. Boaz is also commending Ruth for her kindness in verse 10. The word kindness in the Hebrew is the word chesed, which is often a attribute of Yahweh and is translated in a lot of English Bibles as loving kindness. Sometimes it's understood, I think this is an important part of it, chesed is covenant loyalty. The Lord is merciful, that's the expression of chesed, but he's merciful because he is keeping his promises to Abraham and to Abraham's seed. Okay, so there's an aspect of loyalty to promise and expressed as mercy and kindness. And Boaz is attributing that divine attribute of chesed to Ruth. Other people also have chesed. That's not exclusively used to describe Yahweh, but it's a high commendation. Ruth has become has become a true daughter of Yahweh, who has the same kind of loyalty. The other thing I was going to say is I think the end where Boaz insists on giving her grain, so she spreads out her skirt, her cloak, and he fills it with grain. I think that's a continuation of the parallel with Genesis 19 and the scene with the daughters of Lot. So they make their father drunk, they sleep with him, they conceive, they receive his seed, and they conceive and have children. Ruth is approaching Boaz, seeking not sex in the first instance, but marriage and redemption. But she receives seed, okay? But a seed as food, not seed as a semen, or she's not being impregnated in this scene, but she does go home with seed. So I think that's the whole chapter is kind of following the story of Genesis 19, but doing it in again, Ruth is redeeming the early history of Moab here. Okay, any other thoughts about that last part of chapter 3? Mike, could you read the first 12 verses of chapter 4? Okay, good, thank you. Takes place by the gate, and then there are other references to gates at the end of the passage. It's the significance of the gate as the location of this episode. You have an enactment of a ritual that goes back to Deuteronomy in the exchange of property, but yeah, the gate is the place of judgment. Elders sit in the gates. Boaz is a prominent man in Bethlehem, so he sits in the gates. And I think that the gate is a suitable place for the sitting of a council of elders who are going to make decisions. One of the decisions they're making is who comes in and who doesn't, right? Who's part of our community and who's not? Who's allowed to enter the gates and who's expelled from the community and can never enter the gates again because of some crime. So the gate is obviously a passageway from outside the city to inside, and you can't just saunter in past the gate. You have to be approved and admitted. Okay. I think it also links up with things I mentioned yesterday, where gates and windows, we talked about this briefly, gates and windows are symbols of the gateway of birth. So somebody passing through a gate is being newborn. Israel passes through the bloody doors of their houses, and that doorway is like a birth passage as they go and become a new people after the Passover and through the Exodus. So they're all sitting down at the gate, an assembly of elders making decisions. Okay, and interestingly, the story is set up so that we have two, not one redeemer. I mean, you could just as easily, in terms, I mean, it's because it happened this way, but I'm asking, and when I raise a question about what do you think the significance of this is, you can imagine a storyline with Ruth and Boaz where chapter 3 ends and chapter 4 begins with a wedding. And Boaz, there is no rival. Okay, Boaz is just the guy, and they end up immediately getting married with no rival or potential for failure of the relationship. So, what effect does it have on the story? What do you think the significance of what is the significance of the fact that you have a first redeemer, a closer redeemer, and a second redeemer, and who actually does redeem? Okay. And then you can also be thinking, as you're thinking about that, I'm going to pile on another question. Think about the reason why the first redeemer refuses. What's the woman's name? Yeah. She's mentioned here, right? The blessing on Ruth is that her house will be like the house of, or Boaz, the house like the house of Perez. You remember the story in Genesis 38. You have Judah gives his, Tamar marries his first son. The Lord is displeased. The first son dies. Following the Levirate rules, the next son marries her. He dies. This next one marries her but doesn't own, and marries but doesn't want to produce seed. And so he spills his seed on the ground and he dies. And then Judah says, I don't want to lose any more sons, so I'm not going to give her. She's cursed. She's a witch. So I'm not going to give any more sons to her. He sure is supposed to. And then she is able to reverse his decision by tricking him into sleeping with her, and he becomes the father. He's like Lot, okay, another kind of sordid tale. But in the birth scene, you have the hand of Sarah comes out. They tie a scarlet cord around the hand to mark the firstborn, because they're twins. Then the hand withdraws, and Perez, whose name means breakthrough, breaks through and is born first, actually fully born first, but Zerah is the designated firstborn. So that's an example of the first and second. I mean, you got them all over the place in the book of Genesis. Cain is older than Abel. It's the obvious ones. Esau is older than Jacob. Joseph is not the oldest of his brothers. Those are all variations on the first and last Adam. It's the younger that is the redeemer, not the elder. And I think that's the same kind of pattern that we have here. What do you make of the fact that the first redeemer is willing to follow through in purchasing the property, but not acquiring Ruth as a bride? Yeah, he wanted to keep his own family and the property together. So if he acquires the property, that just becomes part of his entire inheritance, which he passes on to his children. Yeah. But if he acquires the property and also Ruth, when she bears a son, then that part of his property is now out of his family, and it's going with the descendants of Ruth. Right. So he wants the land, he doesn't want the bride, and he doesn't want to endanger his estate. And that's a choice he's free to make. He's not obligated to follow through and take Ruth. But it's a sign of Boaz again is proving himself to be a model righteous man. He could refuse too, Because whatever family, I'm not clear if he's had a family before, whatever inheritance he has, this is not going to be part of it. And he could have the same worry, I'll take this land and then it'll eventually go with somebody else, another line. If he has sons from another wife, there's no exact direct indication, but there is an indication that he's older, possibly has other sons, but he's willing to take that risk and take Ruth as well, take the bride as well as the land. Okay, so the choice is the difference is between the first Redeemer who won't take the bride, the second Redeemer who spreads his wing over the bride. Okay, and I think we have another picture of the Lord Jesus as the Redeemer, not only in securing land, but also in spreading his wing over his church and providing safety and care. Let me read the last verses and then we'll close for the day. I'll make a few comments about it. So Boaz took Ruth and she became his wife and he went into her. Okay, that is referring to sexual knowledge. And the Lord enabled her to conceive. The Lord opened her womb and gave birth to a son. Okay, so this is the reversal of the initial situation where sons are dead. The story ends with the son being born. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today. You without a redeemer today. And may his name become famous in Israel. And may he also be a restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. Okay. So again, as I've been emphasizing, Ruth is being redeemed, but her redemption has the result of restoring Naomi. And the son of Boaz and Ruth is going to be a sustainer of Naomi, not just a continuation of the line of Elimelech's dead son. Naomi takes the child on her own lap. That's language that's associated with birth. The child on the lap is usually associated with the mother giving birth on a lap. But here it's Naomi who receives it. Well, the neighbor women gave him a name. A son was born to Naomi, so they named it Obed. It's the father of Jesse, the father of David. Obed is a variation of Abed. Avad means servant in Hebrew. Now, these are the generations of Perez. This is the way if you want to end a short story, a romantic short story, the best way to do it is with a genealogy, right? I mean, that will keep people's attention right to the end of the story. You don't want a marriage, you want a genealogy at the end. To us, this seems odd. I don't think it would have seemed odd to Israelites. I think the genealogy is exactly the whole point of the story, that there is a continuation of Naomi's line. That's the crisis that begins the story, and now that the fact that there's a continuation is the fitting climax. So the genealogy is significant, but it's significant for another reason. Let's try this. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez is that breakthrough son of Judah. To Perez was born Hezron. To Hezron was born Ram. To Ram was born Aminadab. To Aminadab was born Nahshon. To Nahshon, Salmon. To Salmon was born Boaz. To Boaz, Obed. To Obed, Jesse. To Jesse, David. 10 generations. Okay. From Judah to David. We already have encountered a 10-generation theme when we were thinking about Moabites back in Deuteronomy. The Moabites and Ammonites are not allowed to enter into the assembly of the Lord for 10 generations from the Exodus because of the way they treated Israel when Israel was passing through the wilderness. Okay, that was one of the rules in Deuteronomy. There's another rule in Deuteronomy. No one of illegitimate birth shall enter the assembly of the Lord. None of his descendants, even to the 10th generation, shall enter the assembly of the Lord. That's Deuteronomy 23:2. Okay. Perez is of illegitimate birth. he is the son of his, he was fathered by his mother's father-in-law, by his grandfather. So the Judah story with Tamar and the Lot story with his daughters have resemblances within the book of Genesis. But it's the same rule for the Moabites and Ammonites and for illegitimate children in Israel. 10 generations between an illegitimate birth and the full entry. Again, if I'm suggesting this means something like full citizenship, full participation in Israel's civic life and public life. 10 generations before descendants of an illegitimate son can enter. So we've got the 10 generations. The 10th generation is David. Okay, from Judah to David is 10 generations. The David is the first generation from Judah that's qualified to enter into the assembly of the Lord. We're discussing this with somebody over the break or during lunch, but from the time of Genesis, it's been clear that the tribe of Judah is the royal tribe. That's Jacob's blessing. The scepter will not depart from Judah. The Judah will be the tribe of royalty, a tribe of kings. That's partly a reward for Judah's behavior in the end of the book of Genesis. Judah starts out, the last third of Genesis, last 13 so chapters, from chapter 37 to 50, mainly the Joseph story. But you start out with these two stories of Joseph and Joseph being sold into slavery, and I think Potiphar and Potiphar's wife come in, maybe it comes in the next chapter. But chapter 38 is a story about Judah in the middle of the Joseph story. So you start out the narrative with this contrast between Joseph and Judah, and then you end the story when the brothers come down to Egypt, and Judah becomes the spokesman for his brothers, and Judah is the one that's willing to stand in the place of Benjamin. Joseph wants Benjamin to stay in Egypt, and Judah says, no, you can't do that. I'll stay in his place. It would kill our father if you took Benjamin. And Judah steps up and offers himself and acts like a king. That's what kings do. And so the end of Genesis is highlighting Judah's faithfulness after this kind of smarmy start with Tamar, highlighting his faithfulness. This is the royal tribe, but it's going to take 10 generations before there's an appropriate descendant of Judah. Okay? From Perez, I said Judah to David, but it's Perez to David is 10 generations. Last trivia question, sort of trivia question. 10 generations. What do you think of other 10 generation sequences or gaps in the Bible that might be significant? Who's the 10th generation from Adam? Noah, good. A new Adam. And there's all kinds of new Adam stuff going on with Noah. That's very explicit. 10 generations from Noah. Take a guess. You're taking the right guess. Abraham, right? So you have 10 generation gap from Adam to Noah to Abraham. And those are that's lining up a series of human race, as it were. Adam is the original father of the human race. Noah as the father of the new human race after the flood. Abraham as the father of the redeemed human race, because we're all children of Abraham. Okay. And I suspect that the 10 generations at the end of Ruth somehow, he's talking about the same thing I just talked about with the genealogy of Judah. The reason there's a 10 generation gap, I'm assuming that's what he's talking about, unless he's got something else in mind. The reason Judah is not a leader of Israel until David is because of the need for 10 generations from Perez. But that's because of incest, not because of the Gentile. So David has Rahab and also now Ruth in his genealogy. That doesn't create a need for a 10 generation gap. Yeah. So, but they're two different circumstances there. One is the Moabites and Ammonites. That's a 10 generation from the time of the Exodus. And after the 10 generations from the time of the Exodus, Ammonites and Moabites can enter fully into Israel. The other one has to do with illegitimacy Where are you?
Deuteronomy 23,
Yeah,
verse 23.
right. Yeah. Verse 3, so no Moabite or Ammonite shall enter the assembly of the Lord, none even to the 10th generation, because they didn't meet Israel with food and drink. That 10 generation countdown doesn't start with the marriage of an Israelite to a Moabite. That doesn't start, it's when the Moabites and Ammonites acted the way they did back in the Exodus. That starts the 10th generation. And I think it's probably during the time of, well, David incorporates Moab into Israel. So I'd have to figure out the number of generations down in Moab down to that period. It's probably, that's not 10 generations from the Exodus, I don't think. I'm not sure when that time period for the Ammonites and Moabites ends, but I don't think there's anything there that says that you can't marry a Moabite. When Boaz marries a Moabite woman, that doesn't mean that his descendants can't be in the assembly for 10 generations. That's not what it's saying. It's talking about let's say, purebred Moabites and Ammonites can't become citizens in Israel until the 10th generation after the Exodus, when they mistreated and weren't generous too. Yeah, I think that I'm not equating it with kingship. I'm equating it more with, I've used the term citizenship, which is not really a biblical way to describe it, but full participation in citizenship. I think the fact that there aren't any judges from Judah is a sign that Judah is being excluded from leadership in Israel until the 10th generation. So there'd be at least that. I don't think it. I don't think it means that Judah is not a tribe in Israel. I don't think that's the idea for 10 generations. I think being in the assembly has a more specific connotation of participation in the public life of Israel, not necessarily as king, but having a full participation in public life. And as you're pressing the question, I'm not sure we know exactly what they're excluded from, but they do seem to be at least excluded from leadership until the 10th generation. But I would guess that there's something else that they're not allowed to participate in too. I think that works, even if they aren't, if we don't think of them as being next to each other in the canon. Some of the ways that Ruth is described, she's described at one point in Ruth with the feminine term of Gibor. Gibor is mighty man, and she's given the feminine form of that, which is the same term that's used for the woman of Proverbs 31. She's maybe it's Giborah. I don't remember what the form is, but she's a woman of valor, and Ruth is described in the same way. So I think you'd find other parallels too, but yeah, if they were right next to each other, that would be a more obvious thing to think about than it is in our Bibles. So, any other questions or comments? Thanks for all the feedback and questions. And I hope that was enjoyable. I had fun just going through the whole book together, so I hope that was edifying and enjoyable for you all. All right.